Good evening. This is History as a Weapon for Black Liberation, and I'm your host, Sundiata Chajua. Today on Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation, we have the most esteemed Dr. Mary Frances Berry, who is the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought and Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her PhD from the University of Michigan, as well as a JD degree from the University of Michigan Law School. She is the author of 12 books, among them $5 and a Pork Chop Sandwich, Vote Democracy, We Are Who We Are, A Black Family Search for Home Across the Atlantic World, and Justice for All, the United States Commission on Civil Rights and the Struggle for Freedom in America. And one of my favorites, My Face is Black, is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations. Professor Berry has a distinguished career in public service. From 1980 to 2004, she was a member of the U.S. Commission for Civil Rights, and from 1993 to 2004, she served as chair. Between 1997 and 1980, Dr. Berry served as Assistant Secretary of Education in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. She has also served as Provost at the University of Maryland and Chancellor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. In recognition of her service and her scholarship in public service, Professor Berry has received 35 honorary doctoral degrees and many awards, including the NAACP's Roy Wilkins Award, the Rosa Parks Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Ebony Magazine's Black Achievement Award. She is one of 75 women featured in I Dream a World, portraits of Black women who changed America. Siena College Research Institute and the Women's Hall of Fame designated her one of, quote, America's Women of the Century. In 1990-1991, she was president of the Organization of American Historians. She is a fellow of the Society of American Historians and the National Academy of Public Administration and distinguished fellow of the American Society for Legal History. Dr. Berry, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Sundiata. But I want to tell you, I have 13 books and a bunch of articles, and I want you to name all of them. And I'm kidding. And,
Do I have enough time? I have enough time.
And now I have 37 honorary degrees. Not that it does me any good. Somebody asked me, could I sell them and get something for them? Well, I said no.
Sounds like my father.
Yeah, glad to be with you. Yeah,
hey, it's truly a pleasure. And you know, you've already fit into the culture here that we're informal, brother, sister, Mary Sundiata. And so
I have on a shirt that says, read more books. That's what my shirt says. Read more books. That is
appropriate at a time when these people are trying to burn books. So let me say that I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. And a former mentor of mine, Robert Christman, who was one of the founders of the Black Scholar, coined this phrase, Black Scholar activist. And, you know, you are probably one of our most exemplars in that regard. You know, your career, not just as scholars, you say you've got 13 books and a boatload of articles, but you've put your body on the front line. You've made your mind available to the movement. And that's, you know, most important, that we not just produce relevant scholarship, but that we actually be engaged in the struggle to liberate our people and to make a better world. So I want you to be comprehensive, as I know you will, but I also want you to be as succinct as possible. We've got a lot to cover. And I don't know if you know, but I've always been fascinated by Bill Cross's work in terms of Black racial identity formation and his theory of negrescence. And what Cross has, at least the impact on me, has been the need to, whenever I talk to someone, try and get a sense of how you became who you are, right? Because it's a process. You're not born great. You make yourself great, right? In the circumstances in which you encounter and you develop a sense of who you are. So I want to go back to Nashville, Tennessee, where you were born and raised. And can you talk about the time period, talk about some of your experiences and processes that bring you to who you are today? And I specifically want to interject something I found of an interview with you, an outtake from Eyes on the Prize that was done with you way back in 1989. I don't even know if you remember, but
Mhm.
you were being interviewed for, I guess, background material for what became Eyes on the Prize 2. And they asked you a question about a day when you were in downtown Nashville. And I guess you were with one of your teachers, and y'all were maybe shopping for graduation material. And it was the day that the Brown decision came down. And that had a big impact on you. So can you kind of begin with that story and then work us in who you
Yeah,
are?
I think that I don't know how I became whoever I am. People ask me that all the time, and I have no idea. All I know what I've done and where I've been, and some things I remember and some I don't, but I don't know. But the person that I was with in downtown Nashville that day, I was at Pearl High School as a student. Pearl High School was the black high school in North Nashville, which was known all over the country by black people because the basketball teams beat all the other basketball teams in the country. And that zip code, my brother, who is a AME minister and presiding elder, always tells me that that zip code that we were in and went to Pearl High School didn't have anybody who ever went to prison during the whole time that all of our cousins and us and everybody else we know went to Pearl High School. It was segregated, obviously. And high school is important because my mother and my all my cousins and everybody on my mother's side grew up in near Franklin, Tennessee, which is now a big posh place where a bunch of rich people and stars and people go there to live, and on farms and tenant farmings and sharecropping and all that story. And my mother, who was the youngest, finished the eighth grade, but she wanted to go to high school, and there wasn't any high school for Black people. They finally built Pearl High School in Nashville. She didn't get to go, but we all went to Pearl High School. We moved to Nashville. Anyway, the important thing is that the history teacher there was a woman named Minerva Azalea Johnson. And she hated for me to tell people what her middle name was, but I thought it was pretty.
It is a pretty name.
And she was a wonderful history teacher. She was high yellow, as we used to say in those days, and she hated it. So she kept marrying the blackest man she could find and walk down the street with them and go places and have people, looking at her funny and the police looking at him and all that. But anyway, but she was wonderful. And the way she taught, which is something we should remember, all of us today, with all the crises we have over teaching and learning, she taught us from Carter G. Woodson. I took American history from her. There was a curriculum she was supposed to teach.
Mm-hmm.
That the city had put out. And she taught that, but she brought things like Carter G. Woodson and the miseducation of the Negro and all of those things for you to read, and Charles Wesley's book on she brought it all into the classroom. And I was always bored in class and trying to make trouble along with some other people. And so she would give me extra things to read. And then she would have us, anybody who wanted to, come by her house after school and sit down with her and her mother. She lived there with her mother on the Fisk campus, and talk about what we read
Mm.
and talk about it to each other, you see. And she inspired all of us. I mean, really, a bunch of us were poor. We had different classes, economic classes, but a
Right.
lot of us were poor like me. And so she was my inspiration. And when I graduated from high school, she and I were walking down the street in Nashville when Brown was decided, going to try to get some materials for the costumes for the school play at the end of the year. And we saw that the headline had said that about the school case. And I said, "Oh, Miss Hawkins, she had married another black man named Hawkins by then." I said, "Miss Hawkins, does that mean that everybody's going to go to school together next year? We'll be going to school with the white children. And I'm graduating, but those other my cousins, they'll
Right.
be going over there with the white children." She said, "Not so fast, Mary Frances, not so fast." And she was right.
Yes, she was.
Yeah,
She was. She's still right.
yeah.
So you're.
And do you know now with desegregation, that school, that zip code, and my brother often reminds me of this, Reverend Troy Merritt, has the highest percentage of black males that have dropped out or have been incarcerated than anywhere in that whole region, whereas there was nobody. So my brother, I said, "Well, do you mean that we should be segregated again, or what do you mean by this?"
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, "I mean that the conditions under which you give your children to other people to teach rather than teaching them yourself might lead to something like this." That's what he meant. But anyway, you didn't ask me
Well, no, but that's the most relevant point, right?
that.
Because that's what we're dealing with right now.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to come back to that. Um, Nashville has this surprising, well, maybe it's not surprising. In the late 19th and early 20th century, it's a hotbed of black political activism. Particularly, I'm thinking about Benjamin Opap Singleton and the Exodusters, that real estate and homestead association that he created that took like 5,000 black folk out of Tennessee to Kansas, but also Callie House, who you wrote about, uh,
Right.
the ex-slave mutual bounty and pension relief association that had maybe 600,000 members. Um, Operated out of Nashville. So, growing up, were you aware of this prior history of activism? How much of that was part of the community during your formative years?
Well, in fact, that wasn't talked. Those two things weren't talked about. We understood our history, and we knew that there was this history of struggle because of the things we read and because of our own family's struggle. I
Hmm.
mean, I am in a think about me as a child in a very poor family who had been in an orphanage for a while because my mother couldn't take care of some different things that happened to us. But in that family of 12 children, with my mother being the youngest, none of them went beyond the fourth grade except my mother as the youngest, but all of them were clear that their children were going to go to college.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, they just knew they should go to college because other people who did things went to college.
Right.
So
Right.
they said, and here they are working as janitors and cleaning up places and doing all kinds of the domestic work that and labor that you expect people to do once they left the farm. But they just had this thing in their minds. And I think about it, and I think about my Aunt Serena and Uncle Will, who Uncle Will worked at a school where he walked miles every day from the house to get over there to that academy to be the janitor, to clean up and do all that in the snow. It again, what it was, and they said our children are going to college. They hadn't even gone through the fourth grade. and, and all of them went except one, the youngest boy, who said he wasn't going. He didn't care what they said. He wasn't going. But the rest of them did that. And throughout our family and among Black people generally, in that community. Maybe it was because Tennessee and I was there. Maybe it was because Fisk is there. Middle
Hmm.
school is still there. And so you have a center of so-called middle class black people, the teachers, the people who control the numbers, uh, and all the rest of them were sending their kids to college, so you would be able to go to college. But they had this ethos that this is what they were going to try to do. And the disappointing thing, and you must always remember the disappointments as well as the things that are positive, is that when they graduated and would go to try to get a job, thinking that I majored in business. I'll go down here and see if I can get a job doing business. The white folks would say, "Oh, we don't need you to do it at jobs like that." You say, "Well, I went to Tennessee and Iowa, I went to Fisk or whatever I did." And they would say, "Well, that's all right. Forget about that. We know you got those schools. We set up those schools for you to have something to do. But come on in here. We need somebody to clean up this, and we need somebody to wash the cars, and we need whatever." But I think the teachers and the ethos of my family, Minerva was not the only one. There were other supportive teachers there. And I don't want to romanticize it and say that, well, if we just had all of those teachers again, everything would be fine. But something in me tells me that if we had some of them teaching children, that things might be better.
Or that if we had control over the educational
Over
system.
the education of our own children.
Yeah.
And but Callie House, of course, was a remarkable person. I didn't know about her when I was small. When I discovered her, when I
What
was
time you
a
discovered her?
I discovered her when I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan, and I went with a group of us in somebody's raggedy car from Ann Arbor over to Detroit to see the great John Hope Franklin, who later became a good friend of mine, give a lecture. And so we were there, and then we were at the reception, and an elderly black man came up to me and he said, "They tell me you from Nashville." I said, "Yes." He said, "That do you know about that black woman down there who started that thing to try to get reparations for us for all the work we did and whatever?" And I said, "I never heard of that because Minerva hadn't. I don't know if she ever heard of it. She never told us about that, and it wasn't in Carter G. Woodson or any of those books." And so he began to tell me that a man who worked in the factory with him, the Ford factory, was from Tennessee, and one day was telling him a story about this woman and how she had started a movement and that how important she was. And I said, "Well, what did you do with that?" He said, "I went down to the Urban League and said, 'Do you people know anything about this woman?'" And I said, "No." Uh, said, "Well, where do I find something about his history?" They said, "Well, maybe some records," because the man had told him that she got the federal government punished her for what she did. "You go to Washington, go to the National Archives and ask them if they got anything about it, because they keep all those government records." That's what they told him. He didn't go right away, but one time he was in D.C. and he went down there and they told him they didn't know what he was talking about. But he said to me, he said, "Maybe you can find out something about this woman." But I believe this guy, and I believe that there was such a woman. And I then, when I was in Washington the next time, went down the archives, and there was a black woman. Only one black woman was a professional in the National Archives at that time. One. Her name was Sarah
What years
Jackson.
are we talking about?
Probably 1963.
63.
1963, yeah. And there were people around there bringing in books and stuff and papers and stuff. But I'm talking about somebody who's supposed to be a professional
Yeah.
archivist. And Sarah Jackson, when I was an undergraduate at Howard, Elsie Lewis, one of our teachers, would take us down there, and Sarah would show us around the archives and show us how to use it. So I was familiar with the archives. And my master's thesis was on a Black regiment that I later wrote, We Are Who We Say We Are, the guys in it. And I'd been working on those records. So I went down there to see Sarah Jackson. And I told her the story. She said, "Come here, Mary Frances. Come here, go with me. Come on, walk with me." So I walked all down through the bowels of the National Archive with her. And she said, "See that pile of papers over there in the corner?" I said, yeah, what are they doing over there? She said, that's about that woman. She said, those are
Mm.
all the papers about this woman. And she was on trial. They put her in prison for what she did. But nobody has ever done anything with these papers. And they've been there waiting for somebody to do something. But maybe you'll do something with it. And that's how I found it.
Wow, that is an amazing story. You know, there's the trial transcript. I think I ordered it probably around 2004. And when you
Mhm.
came to Illinois in '05, I remember that the only people that were listed as having ever looked at that transcript were you and I.
Mhm.
It's,
Think about
it's
it. All
here,
those years.
all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you went to Howard as an undergrad, and I know that Rayford Logan was one of your professors, and you know he's noted for the betrayal of the Negro, and I think it was published previously as something else that had the Nadir in the title.
The
And
Negro in American Life and Thought, the nadir.
that's
And
right,
then he has some dates.
1901, 1877 to 1901.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Okay, so it gets republished in '65 as the betrayal of the Negro. And some people might know that edited collection that was actually very, very fantastic in terms of the breadth of Black political thought that was included in What the Negro Wants, that book that came
Mhm.
out in
Oh,
'42.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but people don't seem to know him as a diplomatic historian who wrote about the Caribbean and wrote about Africa. And so I'm wondering, uh, you were one of the co-founders of the Free South Africa movement, and in fact, famously was arrested along with Randall Robinson and Walter Fauntleroy at the time. Did Where did your internationalist, Pan Africanist interests come from? Was Did Logan have an impact? Were you a member of SNCC? Because you also were heavily involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. Uh, so where did those things come from?
Where did this woman come from? Who
Yeah,
are her people? What is she?
yeah.
No,
Who are
Rayford
you?
Logan. Rayford Logan, like all the teachers at Howard that I came into contact with, um, made a tremendous impression on me. I know, and he taught us diplomatic relations between the United States and Haiti, which is a remarkable book that he wrote that people don't. And he was one of the brain trusts that worked with Franklin Roosevelt, the Black Brain Trust, the BBT, that he called in the quiet of the night and try to help him do stuff and all the rest of it. So Rayford, and he had served in the military during World War One and came back with stories, and he and Charles Hamilton Houston about the awful things that happened to Black men over there in France and so on, with women telling the white soldiers telling women that they all had tails. And so if you
Mm,
see one, ask him if you can see the tail, that kind of stories.
yeah.
But Rayford, yes, he talked about the Caribbean and he talked about American foreign policy and how dastardly some of the things and the debt that is owed to Haiti, the way Haiti has been so misused. Poor Haiti, all these years. And so when people start asking, why is Haiti so poor and why is whatever, that is because they punish the Haitian people for defeating the French.
That's right.
They have been perpetually punished. And the French had the nerve to ask them to pay them back some money for having defeated them, you
Oh,
see, and got
150
rid of
million.
slavery. Yes,
150 million.
you
Yeah.
got to pay us for that damage you did to us, you
Yeah.
see.
Getting
And
your freedom.
so, yeah, it's like people who now, when I'm somewhere speaking, some person will get up in the audience and say, "Well, I don't understand why you're talking about reparations. Our men, white men, fought in the army and freed y'all, and so wasn't that enough to get freed? And then I tell them about the 200,000 or so black soldiers that fought and earned their freedom and all that. They don't want to hear that. So I knew about. I was very much interested in foreign policy. The other thing is that at Howard, I had gone for a year to Fisk before I went to Howard. And at Howard, I was a chemistry major. I was a science major. I did all the sciences. And then I decided that I didn't like it, mainly because we had science lab in chemistry, organic chemistry, for 2 semesters during the summer.
Oh,
And it was hot as I don't know what, and there was no air conditioning in the lab. And you had to go down there and stay down there all day. But anyway, once I was through with that, I decided I loved philosophy. So I changed my major to philosophy. I took a lot of history. But in my classes were people like Stokely Carmichael and all the guys who were in SNCC, people who were in SNCC, Michael Thelwell and others were in the class. And we were all called nerds by everybody because we would walk around with these book bags on our back and always talk about some people, Aristotle and with Socrates. And I did my senior thesis on the Theaetetus theory of knowledge of Plato, which did make great dinner table conversation uh, later on. But they all went off to SNCC. It was at Howard too, where Jimmy Baldwin came and talked to us. All the people who would come and talk to people like us came, and they all went off. But since I was a poor child, I had to pay for all of my education and everything else, and help other people in my family. So I had to work.
okay.
So I worked on a 3 to 11:30 at night shift in a hospital there, running labs because I'd done all the sciences, so I could do that. And but I was with the SNCC people, and they were friends of mine, and so on. And then I went off to University of Michigan to graduate school, and I went there because one of my professors thought that a distinguished man who did slavery studies could be my advisor.
Hmm.
And the day I got there, I went to try to see him, and they told me, well, he just retired. So the only good part of it was that I got a job in the hospital lab there and ran the lab in the evening while I went to school. But the Vietnam War was underway.
Mhm.
And I was very much interested in knowing about American foreign policy and all that stuff in the war, and became part of the anti-war movement. And not only did I become part of it, I decided in the summer of 1967 to go to Vietnam. And I write about this in History Teaches Us to Resist. I wanted to be a reporter because I wasn't a reporter, but I wrote to the Pentagon and asked them, could I go over there to see what was going on for myself? And they said, no, not unless you're in the service or you're a reporter. And I knew I wasn't in the service.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to be in the service. And I said, well, I wrote again. They didn't expect me to write again, probably. And I said, well, how do you get to be a reporter? They said you need, I don't know, 200,000 subscribers to whatever it is you're working for, and send us the letter saying you're their correspondent, and we will, if you get 200, so I got the ones on campus, the student newspaper. I said, you want a war correspondent? They said yes. They said, who? I said, me. They said, we didn't know you were a war correspondent. So they wrote a letter saying I was their war correspondent. And then I went around to all the little towns around Ann Arbor and got the local papers to write a letter saying I was going to be their war correspondent. Sent them to the Pentagon. They sent me my credentials, which I still had. Told me, you get to Vietnam, however you can get there. That's up to you. And you can go down to the press thing on Rex Hotel, which is still there, downtown Saigon, and get your gear because you got to have your combat gear. And you can go anywhere you
You
want.
say your combat gear. What precisely did they mean?
They meant that I had to get uniforms, fatigues, boots, helmet, the whole smear because I was going out in the zone, battle zone.
Everything but a weapon.
Right. I didn't have a weapon. And then they assigned a sergeant to me who was huffing and puffing along the way behind me, who was supposed to see to it that I didn't get killed
Okay.
because there had been one American woman there who was a photographer, Dickie Chappelle, who worked for Life magazine and who had covered many wars. And she had stepped on a landmine and gotten killed.
Hmm.
And they said, "We're not going to have you killed. So this guy's going to follow you everywhere." And all he did was huff and puff and try to, keep up with me or whatever he could do. And he had a weapon, but I did not have a weapon. So I went all over Vietnam. I wrote dispatches. I saw the horrors of war, and met some wonderful people, and wrote all those dispatches that were in the newspapers. And then when I came back, I went around and talked to all of the Chamber of Commerce, the VFWs, all those lodges, and said, I was in this place and we weren't winning the war. And I was in that place and we're not winning the war. And this place, and told them what I had found. Yes. But I had a very strong interest in internationalism from the time I was at Howard and engaged with Rayford and the rest of them.
This sounds like a very, I mean, it's not an early moment of U.S. imperialism, right? Because U.S. imperialism begins
That's a long
with the
history.
formation of the country, right? But there's what you did is not possible today because they're not allowing
Right,
the journalists into the war zones.
right.
They now so neatly control that narrative. So that's just fascinating. And in fact, it's that kind of work that led to building the opposition because people had a sense of what was going on.
Absolutely. And you don't, and sometimes people ask me now, well, were you embedded? They didn't know what that was. Nobody talks about embedding anybody. They said, go wherever you can go, hitch a ride when you're in country in Saigon. It's up to you where you stay. When you're out in the field, you stay with the officers wherever they stay, eat whatever they eat, follow them through. You can ride the planes, you can, walk, you can do, and I did all of that. You can be with the Navy, the Army, the Marines, and I was everywhere from down in the bottom of Vietnam all the way up to the DMZ with the Marines. And so you could go anywhere. And one of the things we did was there was a Swedish journalist who followed me around everywhere once he met me. He was the Washington Bureau Director, Swedish News Broadcasting. And they sent him over there because he kept writing stories about how the United States should be supported in the war. And they didn't believe that.
Mhm.
So they said, take your behind over to Vietnam and walk around some, and then let's see what you got to say. And he didn't like that. He didn't want to be over there. Very sophisticated, nice guy. So, but he went everywhere with me. So one day we were sitting in the press briefing, which took place every day. We called it the 5 o'clock follies because they lied to you all the time. And there was always some reporter who had been wherever they were talking about. And when they finished telling the lie, the first said, well, I was already, And so they were talking about Cambodia and they were asked whether we were bombing Cambodia. And we thought they were, but we didn't know. So he and I went out to the airfield and finally found some pilots who were flying, a pilot who was flying up to Thailand to the base up there to fly to Cambodia.
Mm.
And we said, can we hitch a ride with you? And he said, sure, jump in. So we jumped in and we went up to Thailand, up at the top, Udorn Air Base, where the planes were leaving to go to Cambodia to bomb.
Mhm.
Okay, so we go up there and we see the bombers they're coming, and we're right there with the pilots. And so we came back and we're sitting in the audience, and they're telling the usual lies about how we're not doing anything in Cambodia. There's nothing. I don't know where that story came from. We said we just got back. Y'all want to see some pictures of the pilots, getting on the planes, going up, and we saw the whole thing, and that was happening all the time. I mean, some reporter had been somewhere. Maybe that's why they started embedding people and making them go somewhere.
Yeah,
Well,
that's precisely why. Because now they've got it on lockdown, and obviously that has a very negative impact and dampens an oppositional movement because you don't know. You're stuck
right,
with
and
their rights.
it's like Ukraine, which what we get now is we don't get the straight skinny of what's happening in Ukraine. Some stuff leaked out with that guy who had the papers, the guy who's been arrested.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but and then they lie about it. But that's because, as you said, reporters aren't able to go where they should go.
A friend of mine, Bob McChesney, has been trying to start a movement around the death of independent investigative journalists who were investigative journalists, because
Right,
that's one of the things that they immediately cut with this monopolization of the media,
right,
for sure. So at some point, we want to turn to the contemporary moment, but
sure.
before we do, I want to I want you to talk about your suit to prevent Ronald Reagan from basically doing what Donald Trump was able to do, right? Corrupt the whole bureaucracy. And we already talked about a corrupt system of racial oppression and capitalism. But Ronald Reagan wanted to turn the U.S. Civil Rights Commission into a mouthpiece for his neoliberal and racist and fascistic policies. And so you end up suing him. But you also, when he puts this guy, Clarence Pendleton, on the commission, you're in a battle with Pendleton, who was one of the first big named black neoconservatives who are there. Well, you can tell us, but I think they're different from the type of black conservative or black Republican that existed in the early '60s and '50s, who also pursued a civil rights agenda, but perhaps with more moderate tactics. So the rise of these neocons. Would it be fair to suggest that Pendleton and there's a Clarence Thomas, that these people are the template from which we get Tim Scott, Herschel Walker, Byron Donalds? And how do you account for? They're still a very small, minute fraction, but they seem to be growing. How do you account for this growing
Oh,
right wing black male elected officials and candidates? And then I want you, well, let's talk about that, and then we can talk about the further gender
well,
implications.
okay, well, I'll try to summarize the history of this. It was all intentional. It didn't just happen like Topsy, okay? And for people who want more details about it, if they go to the library and get the book, End Justice for All, The History of the Civil Rights Commission, the chapter on the Reagan administration starts out and explains how they first started developing these Black conservatives in great detail. So if anybody's interested in more than what I'm going to tell you about it, they can do that. It was all done by intention. And it was a stroke of genius, actually. When Reagan became president, they had that famous meeting at the hotel in Union Square in San Francisco, the
Yeah,
name of which I keep forgetting. Um,
Fairmont,
and
the
Fairmont,
Fairmont
yes,
Conference.
the
Yes,
Fairmont Conference. And what they did is to invite all these people who they thought they could bring into the fold. And they were right, they could. The ones, most of Bob Woodson and Clarence, the Clarences,
yeah. There's a bunch of
and
players.
all these different people. And so the idea was that based on, see, I read all the papers in the Reagan Library and stuff, the letters back and forth and all that stuff. Okay. And of course, I was there. So I knew who these
Right,
people
right.
when they got there. The point was that they thought Black people want to have Black people running for office. And the Democrats have Black people, all over the place. And we don't want those black people that come out of the civil rights tradition, some of whom are Republicans because their mama and daddy and granddaddy and somebody, and Mr. Lincoln freed the slaves and all of that. A lot of people have kids named who were named Lincoln in their family because of that. And they became Republicans. My friend Sam Jackson from Kansas, who was an appointee over in the Nixon administration, came from Kansas and was head of the NACP there. Wonderful lawyer. He's passed away. And he was a big Bob Dole fan. Okay. And there wasn't a right wing bone in his body. And there were a lot of people who were like that. That's the old school
Right.
people who died out. Then what they said is we need some of these young people, and if they're concerned, we'll tell them that we'll make them. They can go far with us. There's too much competition in the Democratic Party. They got a whole bunch of Negroes, so we got these people, and so they invited them all and groomed them. And Clarence, I remember, talked about how he was not going to let them appoint him to anything. Thomas, and I'm not going to be in anything that has to do with race. He was even quoted in a newspaper said it because people said he was going to work over in the ed department and do civil rights, and he said, "No, I'm going to be beyond that." And John Danford was his guy who helped him, the senator from
Yeah, isn't his
Missouri.
wife a Danford cousin?
Probably, but I'm not. I can't
Yeah,
document it. I never looked it up.
fairly certain of that because
Okay,
I
well, all
spent
right.
time in the St. Louis area. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
that's right. So Danford was his sort of godfather in politics, okay? And so he took the job over in the Civil Rights Division, even though he said he wasn't going to take the job over in the Education Civil Rights part. And then they groomed him to be one of their people, okay? And he used to be on TV with me. We'd be on the Sunday talkies and talk about stuff. And Clarence would usually keep his mouth shut. His posture was to be quiet, even on the TV, and smile because he was on his way up and he was
yeah,
making sure he stayed there.
yeah.
And they got Clarence Pendleton out of Ed Meese out of San Diego. He knew him from there because Clarence was head of the Urban League in San Francisco.
That's right.
And he groomed him and brought him in. That's how he got him. So the point was that it was a stroke of genius that you get all of these people. And they said something else. When they speak about equality and rights and what it all means and all that, white people will say to any black people who object, well, there are these black people who are leaders who believe that what you're saying is wrong. And so we need our team of black people. And that's where it all started. And that's where it has continued. And they did things like, funding them for getting people to fund them for different things if they wanted to write books or whatever they wanted to do, and putting them in positions and all the rest of it. And they were successful, and it's had a pernicious effect. Now, what's happening now? And then eventually they started running people in politics
Yeah.
for office, which is what they planned to do. And they finally started doing it. And now we have more of them coming out because they've been there long enough. But I'm just saying, it didn't start as just like something that just grew up and nobody knew how it happened. It was all planned, and it was a perfect sort of political thing to do. And it worked. They talk about grooming, they were grooming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Clarence Pendleton
Absolutely.
said to me one time, we was at the Civil Rights Commission, he walked up to me, he said, Mary, you're on the wrong track. He said, look at these cufflinks I got, these gold cufflinks I got. Look at this shirt I'm wearing, with the monograms and all the other stuff on it. And I go anywhere, do anything, whatever, and you could do that. These people take care of you.
Mm.
You don't understand. These people take care. Of you. I said, man, it's like Walt Whitman says in that poem. I have perceived that I love to be only with the people who I like.
There you
And he
go.
said, well, you just don't understand.
So
And what I did with Reagan is Reagan decided to put his own people on the Civil Rights Commission, even though he wasn't supposed to do that, and legally he wasn't supposed to do that, as part of that process, and to use them as the mouthpieces, the megaphones to spread the message that they have, so that what they're doing is right and the other people are radicals and all the rest of it. And they ended up, that's why they decided to try to replace us. But the law said that they couldn't really go all the way on that. They won a few. And I stayed, as you know, I stayed on the commission
That's right.
for quite a while after that until I ended up being chair. But by then, the whole civil rights thing inside government was ruined.
And how would you evaluate what Clinton did with the commission? I remember the report. What was it? The conversation on race, and John Hope Franklin was brought in.
That thing,
It was
One
a really
America.
good report, but it fell flat because Clinton didn't do anything. So I guess I'm trying to get at how different was a neoliberal like Bill Clinton from the neocons like Ronald Reagan.
Well, Bill Clinton is he's affable like Reagan was affable. They're both more affable people that you like to stand around with and have talk to, whatever, smile, whatever. If they had beer, they would drink it. They probably didn't drink beer, but in any case, that's what they are. And Bill Clinton, of course, has an engaging personality too, and Reagan did. But Bill Clinton was one of these people. He knew that the black vote was key to some of the stuff Democrats did, and Democrats needed to keep that. But he wanted to have this middle way, which is why he did all of that. We're going to end welfare as we know it, and we're going to do all that stuff. And he would triangulate and all the things that we know that he did. But he never wanted to get at odds with me, mainly because by then I had a constituency. And he knew from looking at what happened with Reagan that if he started some big fight with me about something, that he probably would get a lot of bad, publicity. Also, he didn't want the commission to do anything big on race. He hoped that we wouldn't, because he knew that I would say, tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And not only would I tell the truth, I already had a PR sort of reputation, and it would get publicity. So I wasn't the kind of person that you wanted to have do something. So what he did is talk my good friend John Hope Franklin into chairing this thing, because he figured John was at a point in his life, elderly and so on, distinguished, and making him chair and building him up and all that, and that he wasn't going to say anything that was really radical. That was the way he perceived it. Okay, right. And so you get a disciplined report. And one of the black guys, who's Ben Johnson, who's been a friend over the years, was the black guy behind the scenes in the White House who put the One America thing together. Okay. It was a PR stunt, like many of those things are. And John Hope was so disgusted by the time it was all over, because he, not having been in government all those years and having had that painful experience with the Kennedys, when the commission had him write a report on Emancipation Proclamation anniversary, and then they didn't want the radical stuff in it, and then they modified it and did all he, and he hadn't had any experiences with the inside since then.
Okay.
And that was way back with Kennedy.
Oh yeah, that
and
was
so
63.
right. Yeah. So he was thinking that maybe Clinton, sincere Clinton, and he seemed like a good, Southern white boy who's reconstructed on race and all the rest of it, maybe like Jimmy Carter or something.
Yeah.
And he wasn't like that. And so John Hope, after that, became very radical in his old age.
Yeah,
He did things
I
like
remember that.
he
Yeah.
did things like citing all the black scholars who he wouldn't cite before whenever he did anything, because he didn't want to offend anybody. He changed completely as a result of that, and especially when he found the Malcolm X principle still applied, which is that some people who didn't know who he was, and when he announced the findings and did whatever, they'd say, "Who is that old man, old black man? Why is he saying
Yeah,
something?"
yeah, yeah.
It was painful to watch. It really was, and it was.
Mary, you got to. Some of our people may not have caught the Malcolm X principle, so you're gonna have to
You
walk
don't know
them
what the
through
Malcolm X principle is.
it. Yeah, you got to tell folks.
Someday I don't know how you tell them that. Do you know which principle I'm talking about?
Yeah, I absolutely do. What do you call a black man with a PhD?
Right.
Yeah.
Filing high and deeper. And so John Hope, in the last few years of his life, poor thing, and I loved him. We spent a lot of time on the phone together and so on. He was just so disgusted. Here he had spent his whole life punching every ticket that you were supposed to punch, thinking that all the white people had all accepted him. This is all accepted him and everything. And that he was actually distinguished and people, whatever. And here they're treating him like he's nothing but a feist dog or something. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. Well,
Yeah.
you didn't ask me that, but that's okay.
Well, no. This is why you're here to tell these stories and give an analysis. So I want to go through some troubled waters here. Um, it does appear that, like for example, last election, and we know the Democrats are full of it, but given that we have one party that, for the most part, is indifferent and maintaining the forms of structural oppression that have always negatively impacted us, but we have another party that I don't think it's too far to say that they desire our complete and total subjugation, and perhaps the elimination of a sector of our population. So we find ourselves trapped between people who are not really for us and people who are trying to do us harm, with malicious intent. So how do you account for the fact that there's been a significant increase of black men voting for a party that's trying to kill us, and a far smaller proportion of black women who have moved in that direction? Um, how do you account for the gender divide here politically?
Well, if I could account for it, I would tell the parties, and they would give me a big consulting fee to explain to them why this is
What's your
happening. But
thoughts?
I'm we have made our own bed, and now we're lying in it. Black people talking. For example, we have. I really don't think that middle class black people would call themselves middle class, who are doing okay professionally, or they may even call themselves wealthy, depending on how they're doing. I don't really think they care about poor black people.
Yeah.
They say they do. They say they do, but I don't think they care enough. And the reason why I don't think that, the reason why I think that is because they don't put any pressure on the Democratic Party. It's one thing to vote for a party and to be in the party and get some jobs for some of your relatives and to make sure that your family is taken care of. And people tell me, well, my son, he got an internship and so got a job and whatever. It's okay. And Jim Clyburn's family is taken care of. But and I've known Jim Clyburn since he ran the state human rights campaign in South Carolina and had me down there with Phyllis Schlafly to debate on William Buckley's show
Hmm.
about the Equal Rights Amendment. But anyway, there are people, the Democratic Party takes black people for granted.
Yeah.
And black women, a lot of them, not all of them, have bought into the idea that politics is the way and what you should do. And some black men have done that. And this would be okay for their family.
Meaning electoral
Who they
politics
are.
only.
Yeah, electoral politics. Um, vote, get some patronage, some jobs or whatever, do all that. And if they want to do that, fine, but don't hypocritically say that you care. For example, what did we do when they didn't pass the George Floyd Act? What did the Black community do collectively?
You ain't got a
Nothing.
damn thing.
What happened is Biden announced that Juneteenth was going to be a holiday.
Yeah.
And Black people said, oh, Juneteenth is a holiday. Whatever happened to the George Floyd Act? Whatever happened to actually pressing for reform in the criminal justice system? Whatever happened to really putting your body on the line to protect some of the prosecutors who were elected when they started going after them?
Hmm.
Whatever happened to doing any of that? Whatever happened when you complain about a budget deal or whatever it is that doesn't take care of poor people? Whatever happens when they just ignore you and go and do whatever they're going to do?
That's right.
So that whatever happens when they spend all these billions of dollars on this war in Ukraine and take in refugees and turn away Haitians and all kind of people who want to come to this country. And what do we do about it? We don't do a thing.
But now there
And
has been I would call it a resurgence. I mean, not a big wave, but a wave of greater militancy and demonstrations that grow out of the murder of Trayvon Martin, the murder of
sure,
George Floyd,
sure,
and
sure.
Ferguson, Michael Brown.
And the
Um,
murders keep
that
happening.
moves beyond the litigation and the electoral politics. So there is a somewhat slight return to social movement.
But the murders are continuing,
Yes.
Cynthia, and you know that.
Uh,
And the pressure is not relentless.
no,
The
it's just
murders continue. And if you believe in inside politics, you should be disturbed when they don't pass the George Floyd Act. You figure out your pressure hasn't been great enough. Instead of nodding your head and saying, well, the police unions, they got, too much power and we can't do nothing. You
yes.
see, you can always do something. You see, Martin Luther King said that he thought that once we got the right to vote, he hoped that once we got the right to vote, people would take us seriously because they wanted our vote, and therefore we wouldn't have to march and protest and do all those different things. And then when he went to Chicago and went to L.A., and the brother said to him, man, you telling us to vote? We vote all the time. The precinct captain come and get us and take us. And do you see do you see that those that asbestos? Do you see those roaches? Do you see that lead? Do you see this job we don't have? And there must be something else we can do in addition to voting. There's nothing wrong with voting. And so that's when Martin, what did he do? He went off and wrote Where Do We Go From Here,
That's
and
right.
talked about you got to use nonviolent protest in addition to voting. Well, our people are weak need. You can we When we did the Free South Africa movement, we spent a year and a half meeting every morning at my house in Washington
See, America,
before
America,
we
can you
went out.
repeat that again? Because these people don't understand the need for planning. But go
A
ahead.
year and a half. We all had jobs too, so we went to work after that. Uh, Planning and plotting and figuring out the day and who we could get to come to get arrested, not just in Washington, but in other places and chapters. And Maxine Waters was a chapter person on the West Coast, and there were people in, wherever, and all of these things every single day. Randall Robinson, and God bless his soul,
Yes,
rest in peace.
absolutely.
And Walter Fauntleroy and the rest of us sitting down, Bill Lucy, head of the black trade unions and AFSCME and so on, deputy, every single day. Cecily Count, Sylvia Hill, who was the heart and soul of the movement, every single day. That's a long time.
Yes, it
And
is.
then when we got the bill passed and we worked with politicians, that shows you put the politics and the people who are politicians together with the movement.
Yeah,
But you can't do the politics and not do a movement.
yeah,
And so when people tell me that they're serious, now for Black men, my nephew tells me that the reason why young Black men vote for Republicans is because whatever we say about Trump, he, as a young businessman, finally got a loan from the SBA that he'd been trying to get for years when Trump was president. That, in fact, what happened is there was more responsiveness. And he said, did you know that Trump supported that bill that passed and let all those people out of federal prison that had been there a long time called the First Step?
yeah.
And he's always asked me, did you know? He said, I know the man talks, bad and he does, whatever, and he's weird. But the point is that he actually did something. And he said, you got all these people like the people not who are not in politics, trying to get some position or something,
Yeah, they
trying
got
to
it.
have a business and trying to do something. And on immigration, they said he was fairer than these people. If you sit down and look at it, forget about all the nasty names he was calling people. And so he said, I don't care what the man says. What I care about is what he does. And I know that this happened. So what it is they are disgusted with the uh, politics, actually, and they're trying to try something else. And as for the women, I don't know why the women that you're talking about, there are women I know who aren't like that, who are just as disgusted as the men are. But the key to it is how can we make people understand that somebody has to go through the fire. You can't just say, well, I'm going to vote. You know,
That's
I
right.
vote, but I write in the name of one of my friends who I know is righteous.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, it's going to take work. I want to kind of move us along about 15 after. We want to stop and see if we got questions. But I want to bring you back to 05. And we brought you to
And
the
I
University
came to Illinois.
of Talk.
I came to the campus.
Yeah, you came to the campus. And at some point, there's a conversation. I don't remember all of the context, but you made this point and it stuck with me all these years. You said the white folks got the Federalist Society and we got critical race theory. Now, what did you mean and what do you mean by that? What are you saying?
Well, well, I don't remember why I said that, but I can tell you that the Federalist Society was what the white folks got that is and was very successful
Mhm.
in raising money, getting money, and grooming young people to be lawyers who were on their side of the political issues and the
Mhm.
litigation issues. They put money into law school chapters, they put money into fellowships, they put money into everything. They made it a big time, just like they groomed those people at the Fairmont Hotel and
Mhm.
afterwards, so they'd have a cadre of Black people to be their spokespersons and megaphones and so on. They did the same thing with lawyers. So that, and then once lawyers became judges, they get clerks who come from there. It's a pipeline, and they
That's right.
set it up.
Now,
And they were very
is six of them from the Federalist Society on the Supreme Court? Are all of the right wing, or is it five or six of them are from the Federalist Society, right? Or the Supreme Court?
I don't remember, but they probably are. I know that John Roberts, who I have been reading about and reading all of his memos in the Reagan papers when he was in the White House and Justice Department, has been consistently the way he is about race and all the rest of it. One thing that was interesting, just today, I think, or yesterday, the Supreme Court decided the Alabama
Yeah.
voting case, and Roberts and Kavanaugh joined with uh, Jackson and Sotomayor and Kagan to
Were you shocked?
say that. Hmm?
Were you shocked by that?
No, because what they said was that what Roberts is trying to do is to put some kind of better face on the court. And secondly, this was a no-brainer because of the demography
Mm.
in Alabama. It didn't make any sense not to have any black person. And so they could say it's not really race, it's about the numbers of people and so on, and they put a face on it. But he may start to turn and do stuff because of his concern about the Supreme Court generally
Hmm.
being something that's undermined, and because he knows that the decisions in these other cases that are coming down aren't going to be anything anybody is going to like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whatever Roberts does, Roberts can make wine into water and then turn it back into wine again, as he did in the case involving the Obamacare.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what he did. He turned it a tax into a penalty, and then he made it back into a tax. He can do that. He's a smart guy. So I think that he and Kavanaugh had motives in doing it, and it was a no-brainer to do it. So I'm not surprised. Anyway,
So,
so what I meant was that the Federal Society gives them judges and people who have power and so on. And critical race theory gives us, we can sit around and talk about it in the university and whatever. It's labels, putting labels on things, you know, and it's okay to change labels. Like, you get rid of affirmative action, you say diversity. Then when diversity, you get tired of, you get rid of diversity, and then you think of some other thing and all the rest of it. But that's not like getting judges who have power who can hand down decisions.
so basically, we got theory, and they got a real apparatus to move the country to the right.
Right. What we got was explaining the repression of us, which is historic,
Yeah.
with another label.
Yeah. Which is
When I
interesting.
wrote,
Your book, Black Resistance, White Law,
yes, yes. See, you
predates critical race theory, but every conclusion you reach, they come to 20 years later.
right. And so what it is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's explaining to you how the repression takes place. But and that's okay.
Yeah. We need that.
Um,
We need good
yeah, we need
explanation.
that, but we also need the opposite of the Federalist Society. I've forgotten the name of it. The one that the liberals set up.
Okay.
It's not anything like the engine that they set up and the effectiveness of it.
Yeah, no, that seems good. Yeah, it's quite obvious.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So um, I want to pick up the situation in Florida and understanding that what's happening in Florida don't stay in Florida. It spreads like wildfire. So the DeSantis regime and that Florida legislature have launched a vicious attack designed, I think, to constrict and make the teaching of Black history conform to what they call patriotism and entrepreneurship, not to eliminate it, but to constrict it to those things. And if they can't force it into that box, then they seek to eliminate it. But they've also gone after diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as which even in their watered down form have played some role in getting us into institutions of higher education and having some successful programs to help support people once there. So they're out to eliminate all of that. And just last week, they passed a new law that allows individuals to take the per capita amount allocated to students in the state of Florida and use it as a voucher and take it to private schools, religious schools. And so they are, they've already shrunk public schools to being very ineffective in producing an educated person. Now it seems that they're going to destroy public education. Strategically, tactically, what do you advise we do?
Well, the first thing we have to do is decide what we want. Okay. And we haven't decided that. And you can tell we haven't decided it because we're confused. We behave in a confused manner. I have people tell me when I'm out speaking that they don't go to school board meetings when they're discussing all these contentious issues. And I said, well, why don't you go? Well, I don't want to be bothered with all those old nasty people talking that stuff. I said, well, if you don't go to the meeting and you don't engage in the fight, then how do you expect to like oppose? There's nobody to oppose them when the vote comes. So I don't understand why you would just because you don't agree with them, you're not going to the meeting. Well, I don't want to hear all that noise and all that. Well, see that makes me think that these people who are saying this are either not serious
Yeah.
or they need somebody to sit down and talk to them besides me. But the other thing is that once we decide what we want, maybe what we want is to educate our own children.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what we should do is ask them or figure out a way to have the litigators come up with it to give us the money so we can start our own schools.
Yeah.
You know, see, it's either that you go and challenge them on their own ground and keep fighting to make the schools, public schools, what they should be, which they're not in most places, especially where the poorest children go. But if you're not willing to make that fight,
Yeah.
because you're not even willing to go to the meeting, then maybe what you ought to do is if they're giving out money, maybe what you should do is take the money and set up your own schools and say, all right, give us the money then and fight over giving you the money. But the point is that you have to fight somehow. The word fight somehow, scares people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
freedom is a constant struggle.
That's right.
And it is a fight. And for you to say all this is going to happen and I don't have to do anything. Now, as for what the other side is trying to do, I really am not sure whether their goal is just to stop Black people from being educated. Slave descendant Black
Mm-hmm.
Americans. One thing that they did before was to, in higher education, for example, is to give preferences to Blacks who were not slave descendant African Americans because they thought they could be trusted.
That's
It's
right.
like trusting, it's like giving preference to Black people who are interracially married because you think somehow you can trust them.
Yeah.
You know?
No, no.
and,
The white folks do
which
think
may
those
not even
things.
Right, which may not even be true. But the point is, you say, well, why don't we make so and so who's Black and who's married to a white woman, make him the provost?
Yeah.
You see, because we know we won't have any problem with him. Or things like when I was chancellor at Colorado, the Carter administration people, not Jimmy himself, but the other people said, we should have her come in and run education nationally because the Colorado people checked her out and she's not going to do anything. So, and we know we can trust her, you see. So it's all these things, these markers of trust,
Yeah.
who you can trust. So we can trust middle class immigrants from Nigeria or from some other place or Haiti because we know, they're not going to rock the boat and they're going to be okay. And then they'll still be Black. So people will say, just like the Republicans get their Black people, say, well, we got Black people here. So what are you talking about? But anyway, that's not enough. So we have to decide what we want. If what we want, we meaning black people, some kind of majority of black people, whether we want to fight them over the schools and fight them over these things. And if we intend to fight them, we should fight.
Mhm.
That means putting your body on the line. That means going and engaging in the debate. That means closing down things.
That's right.
It means stuff like those people in Colorado, the women who, some white women and some black women, indigenous women got together and said, we want to do something about guns. And nobody's going to do anything. So what we're going to do is go and sit in at the Capitol. But I like this. We don't want the black women to sit in because we know the police will abuse them. So the white women will sit in, and the indigenous women and the black women will be there to give them support and march around, do things. But we don't want y'all sitting in because we know
Yes.
what will happen to you.
Right.
You see, so that's the kind of movement, and we're going to do this until the governor issues an executive order about these guns. And they started it. I don't know what it's going, but to me, that's strategic thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and we need more of that. And so it's either keep protect the public schools, fight to protect them, or just say, give me the money and set up some, and try to do something else.
Yeah.
In my
Well,
opinion.
we're coming to a summation, and I gotta. We kind of talked about the Alabama situation, but there's just a series of Supreme Court decisions from the Shelby County Holder 2013 through
Roberts,
the
Roberts.
yeah, and the student, but the Students for Fair Admission at
Yeah, yeah.
Harvard and also at North Carolina, and the Creative LLC versus Elena's, which is about the web designer wanting to be able
Mm-hmm.
to refuse same-sex couples, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just a plethora of right-wing, uh, backward Supreme Court decisions. Where do you see this pushing us? Are we headed back to an era that is more comparable to the Nadir that Logan wrote about?
Um, I don't think we're going back that far. The whole history of slave descended blacks in this country and black people who come to join us is that you make progress and then you fall back some
Right.
and then you make progress more. It's not like, we're going to go all the way back to slavery.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
We're not going
or
that
some,
far, but we're going back.
no, but you go back and then you try to retake the ground and then you go back some more. That's if you looked at the history, whole history, that's what you would see.
That's right.
But and it depends on where you enter on the chart, what's going on at the time. I think that we don't know what these the court is really going to do because, as I said, Robert is very sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
Roberts is sneaky. And I don't know much about Kavanaugh, but I know Roberts is very sneaky. And he may try to come up with some song and dance where he can make it look like something or other and before you can figure it out and go home. Uh, and you think you got something, but you didn't, or whatever. So we'll have to see. He's a smart lawyer. He is a hot lawyer. Can tell you what you should do, not a cold lawyer that everything you suggest he pours cold water on.
Yeah.
In any case, I think that this means that there are people in the country who are worried about change. That's what it means, and who do not want change in the way that those cases address it
Mm-hmm.
to take place. It's just that simple.
Right.
They have their own reasons to say that it's bad for the country and it's not right if you give protection to people that didn't get it before.
Right.
Or it's not right if you, in fact, have all these black people trying to get in places and doing stuff. Why can't they just be satisfied with the ones who, well, look at all the ones who make a lot of money in sports and music and so on? They should be happy about that. But here you got these people pushing their way up into everything in the world. And you have people like the black woman who was killed down there, who was in Florida, Ocala, who was complaining about her children being abused by
Oh,
the next door neighbor. Yeah. How dare she go and challenge me and ask me about what I'm doing? Why don't she mind her own business, and be happy that she's up in here and got some place to stay, you know? And so it's uppity black people getting out of their place. And if you're going to get out of your place, you have to really get out of your place and push these people. That's what they're trying to do, and they are using it politically. Some people are using it as a way of politics to get support from people who feel like that. Whether they feel like that or not, I don't know. But that's what's happening in the country. There's an appetite for this. Yes.
absolutely. So I want to thank you so much, and I want to turn to the chat and pull out a couple of questions. For the most part, uh, people are just sending you love and saying how much they're learning. And well, here's one. I love hearing Dr. Berry and hope she'll come again and again. But there are questions about the Reagan administration. So QKR anarchists ask, people say we have been living the Reagan administration since Reagan was first elected. Do you consider his administration unending, or the different presidents have differences of any import?
Reagan was a game changer. His administration was a game changer. And because of his way of doing things and his personality, a lot of people now don't even remember what Reagan did or anything about it. They got airports named after him, and something in every state named after him, and so on. They talking about he's the greatest president. You got even some black folks talking about it. Reagan was a good, president. The man was awful. He was worse than Trump. I tell people that,
Hmm.
and they look at me and say, just like you just did. Worse than Trump because he was slicker. Worse than Trump because think about DeSantis, for example, how he is tricky and slick. But Reagan is even better than that because he's got that sunny movie star, sort of personality. Uh, and so people believe things like it's morning again in America, or whatever, whatever he said, and they go on.
Yeah, shining
But
what he was. Yeah.
the policies, which are remember how in his administration they deinstitutionalized the mentally ill,
Yes.
one of the biggest things that ever happened. And the policy was sold as soon as we deinstitutionalize, we're going to build community centers where they will have all the medical resources and all of the supports they need, and they can live, independently, and it won't be a problem because we're saving them from the snake pit of the institution. And look what we have: a
That's
bunch of homeless people, starting with Reagan, which he proposed nothing, and which his administration did nothing about, and which successive administrations have let worsen.
that's right.
And now talk about why do we have a homeless problem? Those mayors, the people I feel sorry with for are the black women who are the mayors of these cities.
Mm-hmm. Have
There
inherited
was
this
a
big problem.
they have inherited this, and Ray Marshall, a white guy who was a labor historian,
Yeah.
wrote a lot about black labor unions and was Secretary of Labor in the Carter administration. Well, we'd be sitting around talking about black unemployment and this and that and other with the president. He told me one day, Ray did, you know what? He said, whenever anything is turned over to black people, that means that it's in decline
Yeah.
and that nobody's going to do anything about it who has any money
That's
to
right.
dole out, whether it's taxes or whatever. So he said, you just watch it. Look at the
Mhm.
decline of the labor unions. And he was talking about different things.
Yeah.
Look at the cities where you have black people being handed the city at a time when the homelessness is rife.
Yeah. Yeah.
The money coming in is gone. And then you think, oh, they gave me this city. Isn't that wonderful? These people are just so wonderful. And not realizing, again, there is a solution to everything that I have said. The solution is you got to push, you got to resist. I describe how in history teaches us to resist, my last book. And I've done it myself. And you got to be willing to put yourself on the line, and you have to be willing to do it. And if you don't do it, then we're just going to go along just like we are now.
No, you're absolutely correct. Now, here's a question from, well, these people have some interesting. Sith Lord Prince. And it says, thanks, Sister Barry. What are your thoughts on teacher community-owned schools as a charter, basically a school cooperative, just thinking about, thank you for your scholarship. I think you kind of answered that question, but if you want to comment on it.
We either get the money and set up our own schools and teach our children, or we fight to try to maintain the ones that are there and try to make them better, one or the other.
There's a question from Veronica Ancrum, and it's phrased as, what do you think of Obama praising the Reagan era?
I think that Obama tried to and succeeded make sure he got elected for 2 terms, and that he didn't do anything that upset white people enough to kick him out. And that he tried to be affable. Remember the beer summit while he's sitting around and talking to this guy all those different things that he did. He never wanted to go what they would might have considered. It was like John Hope Franklin in his early days when he was punching all the tickets and tried to say to all the white scholars, "I'm like you, and I believe what you're saying," and getting ahead that way. He thought until in the end, his shoe fell down on his neck. And so I think Obama, who is a wonderful personality and wrote this book with Josh Gottheimer called Power in Words, which is all about his speeches and why he gave the ones he gave, the background. That he praised Reagan because Reagan is an icon and is a hero to the society generally and has all them things named after him. And so he wanted to be identified with that and didn't want to challenge or question the real Reagan. He's not stupid. Obama's not stupid.
Right.
And he understands things. So what he's doing, his whole life is in a sense a public relations show.
Okay, this will be the last question, and it's from Quark Anarchist and Quaker Anarchist. Okay. Any thoughts of Dr. West running for president with the People's Party? That's with libertarians and Mises Caucus. I don't know the Mises Caucus, but I do know the libertarians.
What I think about Cornell running for president.
Yes.
Is that the question? That's the I figured that if I'm going to vote, I will vote always for friends of mine who I think are righteous people and write their name in. If Cornell is on the ballot, I can at least, vote for him instead of voting for whoever are the turkeys on the ballot with the likelihood of success as much as my friends whose names I wrote in on the ballot. That's my view. I think it's good that somebody else is running. And in a sense, it would be nice if he raised enough money to actually be in the debates.
That's right.
And then so they can push him out. Then we would have a very interesting series of debates.
Yes, they would.
He has no chance of winning, obviously.
With that, Dr. Barry, it's time for me to bring it to an end. My producer, Henry Radcliffe, is always pushing me to be time conscious. So I want to say, I greatly appreciate you coming. What's in the chat is nothing but pure love for you and for your contributions to our history and to our struggle. You mean a lot to all of us. Thank you so much. I'm going to remove you from the chat and start playing our theme song.